It's coming from CNN. This one's going to be kind of heavy. All right, this is going to be a bad cop, no donut. All right, he cut my underwear, then he did what he did. They wanted democracy. Instead, they were beaten and raped by police. Wow, this is a story coming from Europe. All right, out of Belaruse. These are some sexual assault and abuse claims and some assault claims in general. In Ukraine, Sergei stood on a small sheet of ice in the Dnieper River and breathed in icy air hard. He had escaped, but that relief was overwhelmed by both the pain of leaving his homeland and the fear he might not survive the rest of his perilous journey. I should say. He was wanted again by Belarusian police. He had already been detained last summer and was beaten in custody, all for protesting against the election victory declared by President Alexander Lukashenko. Fellow protesters he spent time in detention with had just been arrested, and it was clear police would soon come for him again. Reluctantly, he knew he had to flee. So once again, this is a story coming out of Belarus, and apparently the police there have been abusing people, and it's been pretty upsetting. There's going to be some stories here. There's going to be some video here that you're going to be watching that's going to be pretty upsetting. So if you don't want to continue any further, I understand, but bear with me. It's going to be pretty brutal. His was a particularly remarkable run for freedom. He crossed the border into Ukraine illegally and was not able to walk through the forest and across sheet ice like many before him had done. In a hurry and surrounded by melting ice, Sergei put on a wetsuit and flippers he had brought and swam. In a video he filmed on his phone halfway through his 2-hour journey on New Year's Eve, he recorded part of his escape, which involved not only swimming in freezing temperatures and through dense reed, but stumbling over sheet ice and crawling through thick sludge. Such was his desperation to leave. Nighttime escape. Sergei escaped Belarus last New Year's Eve on a brutal 2-hour journey, swimming across 2 rivers through thick reed and in freezing temperatures, walking on thin ice sheets and crawling through sludge to reach the safety in Ukraine. Wow. So this is actually his journey. And it's actually a map here. Good God. So he was running from the cops in Ukraine, in Belarus, and he was trying to get to Ukraine to escape them. My socks are freezing right to the ice. I will try to crawl there and hope that I will not freeze, he said at one point in his video. I'm navigating by the stars, he said, audibly cold. The feeling is indescribable, and I am all alone here. Hundreds of thousands of Belarusians attended mass protests across the country last year following Lukashenko's declaration of victory in the August vote. The U.S. and EU declared the vote fraudulent and imposed sanctions on Belarusian officials over the fraud and the brutal crackdown that followed. So this is a picture of all the people who were protesting, man. Holy smokes. So opposition leaders protest against disputed election results in Minsk on August 23rd, 2020. So this is all the people who were protesting. Whoa, it's a lot of people. This is like a thick sea of people, man. A thick sea of people. Sergei, who has asked CNN not to reveal some details of his story and his name and his real identity, has now claimed asylum in another country, and he wanted to share his story with CNN so that the relatives he left behind might one day read what had happened to him. I left my country, my friends, and family with bitterness of defeat, he said. I simply became a refugee and had to start again, as if all I had achieved was for years was suddenly nothing, I should say. To this day, I am mentally exhausted and sleepless and worrying about those I left behind. CNN has spoken to several other Belarusians who have fled the repression of Lukashenko's regime illegally across the border into the Ukraine as part of a 2-month investigation into the crackdown inside the country. In dozens of interviews, protesters and opposition activists have spoken of torture, from systemic beatings to rape with the police baton. Wow. Rape with the baton. Defectors from the police force have also supplied CNN with videos from the police's own archives, body cam, dash cam, and surveillance footage that displayed the extraordinary ferocity of police riot of riot police against protesters who are unarmed and peaceful, many of them teenagers. Oh, God. Look at this. So you can see the beatings in this GIF right here. Good God, man. Good God. This is in August 13th, 2020. This is from their own archives. You can see it. Wow. The Lukashenko regime has, activists say, slightly softened its tactics in the past weeks as fear has gripped the opposition movement. Yet there are concerns among activists the crackdown will intensify again ahead of the nationwide call to the streets on March 25th. The fate of the Belarusian protest movement has gained greater significance in the past months as anti-government protests spread inside neighboring Russia against the attempted murder and imprisonment of Alexei Navalny. Russian President Vladimir Putin swiftly moved to support Lukashenko in August with a $1.5 billion loan and other unspecified assistance. The Belarusian protests, however, have continued. Analysts say the Kremlin is concerned both by a persistent protest movement for democracy on its doorstep and the impact of unprecedented levels of police violence on how a younger generation of Belarusians view Moscow. So Russia is intervening because they're seeing the worldwide movement against police violence and police brutality. And I think they are concerned mostly because of what's happening, mainly because it's promoting reforms in their own country. You know, if you look at some of the protests that are happening in Russia that are being prompted by supporters of Alexei Navalny or people who are just against the police state in Russia in general, you know, what prompted that, a lot of that was what was happening here in America, in Canada, and in Mexico. You had so many protests that happened during last summer that it emboldened people. It showed people that people should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. After being presented with a summary of CNN's findings, a State Department spokesperson said the U.S. strongly condemns the months-long post-election brutality carried out by the Lukashenko regime against peaceful protesters. The statement added that there were more than 500 documented cases of severe abuse, 290 political prisoners, and a number of individuals still reported missing. So there are people who are still missing, and the last time that they were seen was them being abused by the cops in Belarus. These violent actions have destroyed the Belarusian authorities' legitimacy among their own people and the international community, they said, demanding the immediate release of political prisoners and all those unjustly detained, and for those responsible for severe abuses to be held to account. He cut my underwear using this knife. The police dash cam footage begins with a police car showing a white SUV full of protesters. It is September 13th, 2020, and the vehicle is carrying activists away from a demonstration in central Minsk. The car pulls over, and then the devastating police onslaught begins. So you can see there, people are being held down and being held at gunpoint there who are just protesters, man. Wow. It's just, who would have known that people stand up against this would have been caused by George Floyd, man. George Floyd and Sarah Everett and so many other names, so many other people around the world who have been mistreated, abused, killed, raped, murdered, tortured by police officers. Who would have thought that it'll be the victims of those crimes who would have prompted other people to come forward? I mean, these are whistleblowers. These are police officers who came forward with this footage from the police archives in Belarus. Who would have thought that George Floyd would have changed the world? That people would have finally got tired of being sick and tired. The footage shows batons hitting the car's windows. The police officer fires a live round into the vehicle. The protesters are yanked out violently and forced to lie face down on the ground. Two men in the group are bleeding, one heavily and another from his cheek. after the side of his face is ground into the asphalt. The detainees lie motionless. Sometimes their heads are pulled back and they state their names. A police body cam shows an officer busy treating a small cut on his hand from the glass. The heavily bleeding protester is eventually given a bandage from his head. The heavily bleeding protester is eventually given a bandage for his bleeding head. So, look at this. He just kicks people. Just kicking people who are handcuffed. Wow. A scene in video given exclusively to CNN by BIPOL, an opposition activist group of former Belarusian police officers who have defected, is one of dozens that they have released that detail police ferocity. And some detainees are seen on camera visibly beaten and marked with red paint, a grim sign of the police's traffic light system of grading protesters in detention. Those painted red should receive the worst treatment. Sexual assault allegations have also been made by men and women against the police. Andriy, a protester from Minsk, told CNN he was raped with a police baton in a bid by police officers to make him unlock his phone. They wanted the identity of his fellow protesters, he said, asking that some details of his experience and real name not be disclosed for his safety. So a man has come forward saying a police officer took a police baton and molested him with it. Andriy says he refused to give the password and was beaten. It just hit me again and again. At this time, I probably had brain trauma as I started to feel really dizzy. It was hard to move at all, he said. The police officer then threatened to assault him with his baton, asked his colleagues for a condom to sheath the weapon, and took a knife from a colleague. He cut my underwear using his knife. He asked me again to give the password. I refused again, and then he did what he did. Andriy felt pain, but also shocked that a person could do this to another. It was not just police anger. They trained people to do this. He said, we are just now seeing it at a huge scale for the first time. It touched nearly every family in Belarus now. So this is Andriy. An officer took a baton and anally raped and molested this man and assaulted this man with that baton because he wouldn't unlock his phone to reveal the identities of his other protesters and the names and the phone numbers. He was protesting elections that both the U.S. and U.K. have called illegitimate, and many people in that country consider to be illegitimate. The man was just protesting, and he was sexually assaulted with a baton. The officer even put a condom on the baton to do this. The Belarusian Ministry of Internal Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Prime Minister's office did not immediately respond, seeing this request for a response to what the footage of police tactics and violence shows and what the allegations of abuse were made. Mass arrests and protests in Belarus are often met with such brutalities. Another leaked police video by BIPOL shows the aftermath of an October protest in which dozens of demonstrators are forced to stand in packed police station corridor facing the wall, their heads bowed, some bleeding on the walls, others suffering from beatings or tear gas they appeared to have been exposed to in other protests. In the video, the police officer passes between detainees asking for their details and why they were at the protest. One man has had 7 teeth smashed out. They were all visibly shaken, and the majority will go to face criminal charges for protesting, activists said. The footage also chillingly shows police walking over the unconscious body of a teenage boy on the floor. CNN has learned the detainee likely suffered from an epileptic fit and was left on the floor by police who passed over him. Witnesses said that the boy was occasionally kicked by police to see if he was responsive. Are you a boy or girl? One witness recalled the police shouting. The minor was later released from police custody, according to witnesses who did not want to be named. So the boy had an epileptic fit, and the police just walked over him and just kicked him and didn't show any kind of care for him. Unbelievable. Police in that central station that night were also busy locating those who had escaped riot police, CNN has learned. One was Anya, a teenager who did not want to reveal her real name for her safety. She fled an advancing line of riot police who were throwing stun grenades at protesters. The explosion that caught her was captured on video. I didn't fall, she said. I froze like a deer. I just stood, thought, breathed, looked around. You know, she's saying that she was deliberately targeted, and this is Anya. Her face is being covered up. She's a teenager, and she was hit by a stun grenade from the police. Just wow, the abuse that's happening in Belarus right now. Joe Biden and the federal government's got to say something. It's got to say more. We got to do more. We got to stand with our brothers and sisters in the Ukraine and also in Belarus against this abuse that they are suffering. We got to stand in solidarity. A man was raped with a baton. Women are raped by these cops. People are beaten. People are tortured. People are abused. We've got to stand up and say something about this shit, man. Enough's enough. This is just unbelievable. I knew the problem was bad. I've heard that the problem was bad. I had no idea how bad it truly was.